The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
And you are very welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby Podcast. A couple of days out from the second test between Ireland and New Zealand in Dunedin, and delighted to be joined by Bernard Jackman and Michael Corcoran, who's coming live to us from Dunedin. And as he was just saying off air, staying in the All Blacks Hotel, getting a bit of inside information on us. What have you seen so far? How are you comparing size-wise to a couple of those All Blacks lads?
It's probably the same weight, but unfortunately theirs is distributed over a higher, taller kind of individuals, to be fair about it. It's kind of interesting, really. The first person I met, actually, when I came in, when I was checking in, was the former Ireland forwards coach, John Plumtree, and we were chatting at reception because they were heading out to training a couple of moments later, and Greg Feet came around the corner, so he's only back in camp early today with them. So they were sort of going, what did you make of last week? What about this week? What do you think? Whatever, the whole thing. So we were just kind of shooting the breeze with them, really, and they were heading off to go training at the stadium outside. So big sense of anticipation. I was offered help with my luggage as I was struggling to push the trolley into the lift. Sam Kane was coming out, but I thought I didn't really want him to miss the test and start it because he jarred his back trying to lift some of the bags that I had to bring. So I'm sure that we'll have a couple more awkward lift moments between now and kickoff on Saturday.
It would have been a nice yarn for the old commentary. In fairness, you could just drop that way. There's been a late change. Sam Kane, he slipped after lifting my luggage a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I didn't feel kind of comfortable with it. You know, I mean, if it's kind of 1-1 after Saturday and it's going into the last, well, I'm not in their team hotel next week. That's the reality about it, yeah. But look, I mean, they're grand, relaxed, casual. Aaron Smith and Buddy Barrett even getting out of the lift together, you know. So I mean, they play together, they get out of the lift together, and there's a good kind of camaraderie there between them. But they feel that they, you know, you kind of get the vibe from them. They're grand, relaxed, really ahead of the game. They have a very, very impressive track record outside at the Forsyth Bar Stadium, and indeed in Dunedin, you know. So it's a formidable task, as it always is when you play them.
Yeah, and what's your itinerary been then for the week? I know a lot of the Irish travelling over there took in a bit of Queenstown for a couple of days. Have you just gone straight from Auckland down to Dunedin?
Yeah, we stopped off in Queenstown just for one night, actually, and there are friends of mine who are living there, and they drove me from Queenstown to Dunedin because they're coming down for the test game. It's a 4-hour drive, you know, across some spectacularly beautiful countryside. It's a bit like kind of you know, I was compared to Connemara, Donegal, Kerry, West Cork, that kind of vibe about it, really. And that's to get to here. I tell you something, I've never been so happy to see Dunedin in my life because it was a long journey in the car, to be honest about it. But yeah, you know, Ireland stayed in Auckland until yesterday, and then travelled down yesterday afternoon. The All Blacks came here on Sunday, so they've been here for the full week. It's quite cold, actually. It was -1 or 2 when we left Queenstown earlier today, but it's not bad here. I mean, it's 4 or 5 degrees, but it's still, there is a kind of coolness about the place. But the one thing I would say about quite a lot of the places around New Zealand, from talking to people and from just walking the streets, the massive shortages of staff from overseas, you know, because the country hasn't opened up properly yet after COVID. So a lot of places are closed down, a lot of places are closing early because they just can't get staff. So it's a problem all over the world, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and that's weather burners, thankfully, isn't going to be an issue on the day of the match because it's going to be plays inside the closed door stadium, the Forsyth Bar Stadium. Just to quickly run through the team news that we mentioned was named in the last couple of hours. So there's one change for both sides. Mack Hansen comes in for Keith Earls for Ireland. So as we expected, Johnny Sexton does start. Rob Herring and Finlay Bealham are both promoted onto the bench for Ireland. Bealham's just out of his COVID isolation as well. And the one change for New Zealand sees Dalton Papali'i come into the back row. Scott Barrett shifts into the second row because Sam Whitelock is ruled out. But they've also put Aidan Ross and Folau Fakatava onto the bench, who will make their debuts. And also Will Jordan, who missed last game because of COVID. He is back in the number 23 jersey as well. But Birch, the the Ireland lineup, just the one change, Mack Hansen coming in for Keith Earls on the wing. Like, it'll be interesting to see how Hansen gets on, but I suppose ultimately it wasn't really something that Ireland were lacking at the weekend. You know, you weren't looking at that game thinking, God, Mack Hansen would have really changed this. It was probably in the set piece and those areas that Ireland fell down on last week.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at obviously Keith Earls' quality. Hansen potentially will offer something a little bit different, but yeah, you're right. That wasn't win the losing of the game. Certainly, you'd hope with the roof being closed, that will help our handling. Obviously, we gave away some probably too many unforced errors in terms of our ability to move the ball across the back line, which Ireland have been very good at. So that's something that you would expect us to be better at. And I think the fact that he's able to go with a very settled team again, you know, it's effectively our best team. We'll hopefully see an improved performance. We seem to be a little bit, I don't know, it's hard to know whether we were fatigued or whether we were just shell-shocked, but we certainly weren't as good as we can be. And I'm fascinated to see how test 2 we improve. I hope we improve, and obviously we put in a much more competitive performance.
Yeah, and it's funny, like the score line and what you would think of a game, because I actually missed the match on Saturday. I was away at a wedding for the weekend, so I wasn't in a position to see it. So I obviously got up on Saturday morning, and I think it was midway through the second half, and you see the score line and you're going, oh, Jesus, don't like the look of that. So I said I'll hold off and I'll watch it in full, you know, when I'm back home and stuff like that. And sure, I was getting ready to come back in and work on Tuesday, and it was getting to Monday evening, and I've been putting off this thing for about a full day now about watching it. And I said, you know what, I'll sit down and watch it. And I was actually quite surprised in the first half, because for the first 20 minutes I was watching this thing going, geez, this is looking all right. You know, it was 7-5. Ireland were playing reasonably well. The attack was actually causing a few problems. And then all of a sudden it was just in that second quarter of the game or even the 10 minutes before half time were just exploded. But Bert, with I suppose the trouble they actually did cause New Zealand in attack, is that something solid that they can kind of build on heading into the second test?
Yeah, I think so. I actually don't think the All Blacks are amazing defenders. They're just so good with the ball that they have. So certainly it was interesting the way we plugged down that blind side consistently. We got soft meters, and then we were on the front foot. So that is something we can definitely try. I'll be interested to see how they try and stop that. We probably just need our forward ball carriers to be more dominant. So we probably need to get like Porter, Tyke Furlong. Doris needs to have a bigger game. He's been more active. That was the problem. I think we ran out of ball carriers, or our ball carriers weren't having the impact that they had been in the Six Nations. So probably from a forward point of view, you know, obviously there's a set piece part of it, but there's also that ability to win gain lines and create quick ball. And you know, our ruck speed, the service that Gibson Park had last weekend was nowhere near what we needed to be for our attack to be functional. So, or not functional, dangerous. So yeah, I think there's definitely improvement there. And as I said, I think, you know, Michael knows more than I do, but it seems as if the feeling, the mood, the confidence is still very high, and yeah, they're looking forward to the second test.
Yeah, Corky, like, has there been any sense from what you've seen in the last few days, speaking to the players and coaches, that they've been a bit rattled by that result, or are they still feeling confident, do you think?
I think they are, yeah. I mean, one word that keeps coming up all the time is composure, or indeed the lack of composure. You know, from an Irish point of view. I mean, if Paul O'Connell last Sunday back in Auckland told us that the word he used was poor, I asked him about the lineup. He said, I thought we were poor. You know, the set piece was another issue. Tyke Furlong spoke about that yesterday, about the number of scrums that they lost as well, and that's probably a little bit surprising. I think that Ireland feel that they can be better. They'll have to be better and improve in those areas. But I was kind of surprised really at some of the decision making. You know, we fought hard enough to try and win the ball and to try and turn the ball over, and then we did, and then we sort of kicked it away and gave it back to them, and we're inviting them back onto us again, and that created all sorts of pressure. So I think Ireland are going to have to be far more composed. I think they're going to have to hold on to the ball an awful lot more and try and play the game to their strengths, and not get kind of suckered into an all black type of full court press, like in a game of basketball where you're going from end to end, basically. That's fine. The crowd needs to be entertained, but Ireland are here for the win matches, not to entertain the crowd. And that's what they're going to have to try to do here in Dunedin on Saturday. The track is the same for everybody. It's interesting listening to Ian Foster and his press conference earlier. And he's talking about how Dalton Papali'i and people like that will bring a degree of speed in terms of what they're trying to do and recycling the ball and trying to attack Ireland more. And I think that's kind of given an indication or an insight into their mindset, if you understand, ahead of the game.
Yeah, and Bernard, like to go back then to the scrum and the lineout, which are obviously two areas of concern over those 80 minutes, and probably have been for a little while as well, particularly the scrum with Leinster and with Ireland. Like how much of a quick fix can you make on those things? Because I know people talk about, the referee's interpretation, and like we would have seen the game against England, for example, in the Six Nations, where we came out afterwards and Andy Farrell said, we've had feedback from World Rugby that, we were doing the right thing. It was, some of those penalties should have gone the other way. But unfortunately, those penalties still aren't going the way of Ireland. Those decisions aren't going the way of Ireland. And sooner or later, you have to kind of fix that problem yourself. You can't be relying on the referee to be digging you out of that hole.
Yeah, the best bit of news I've come across with the Irish scrum in the last 3 months is Michael's interview with Tyke Furlong, and you had it up on the website where he actually just admits that they just need to fix it and they get better. I think up till now there's been a huge amount of blame the referee, blame the opposition props, and we haven't actually addressed it. And the beauty of it is you can actually fix a lot in a week, because there's technical and tactical issues in our scrum. I think with Andrew Porter, Dan Sheehan and Tyke Furlong, we should be capable of having a high level of success on our own ball and not being weak on their ball. I think after that, it's not as simple, because there's a power deficit against some of the bigger teams in the world. But think back to, and I'll go back a long way, but it's just maybe something that the listeners might remember, is the Northampton Leinster final in Cardiff, where the first half the Saints were running amok at scrum time, and at halftime, Greg Feek was able to, get the forward into the showers and show them an overhead, and they could see where the fault lines were, and they fixed it in the second half. And it was a part of Sexton wasn't bad, but it was a part of Leinster being able to win the game. So things can happen quickly in the scrum. It's a change of bind, it's a slight change of angle, can change the picture completely. So again, that's an area that Ireland should be better. And no more talking about referees and opposition cheating. The reality is the scrum has always been about cheating well. We just need to be a little bit more street smart.
Yeah, and then in terms of the lineout, like it seemed like there were issues all over the place there. There were a couple of, I think there were 2 missed lineouts that weren't even contested by New Zealand. One just seemed to be completely overthrown by Dan Sheehan. The second was, it was hard to tell, was the throw early or was the jump and the lift slow, because the timing was just off. And then there was one that was just read by Brodie Rettlick, who just got up ahead of his man. So is it worrying, Birch, that there seems to be issues not just with a throw, but it seems to be between, sometimes the throw is off, sometimes the communication isn't right and the timing isn't right between the players, and then sometimes the calls just seem to be off as well?
Yeah, look, I think it's probably one of the ones where I think that definitely the second week, look, I've no doubt Paul O'Connell and the line-out leaders, I think we struggle maybe for a world-class line-out caller, so it's put more pressure back on Paul, and that's not something that James Ryan can't develop. It's just probably not part of his repertoire at the moment. But again, New Zealand have shown their hand to a certain extent how to defend. Sheehan is incredibly impressive as a rugby player, but he's still very young in terms of test experience. So I think he'll come on again from that outing. And look, I've no doubt that we have the brains and the personnel to win quality ball. So I was more concerned. It was probably a manifestation of the fact that our handling was so poor, our scrum was poor, and then we're focusing on those lineouts. I think our lineout is capable of winning good ball, and again, I would expect an improvement there.
And Cork, you've been on duty following the All Blacks media as well this week. I saw you were dealing with Ian Foster earlier on as well. Like, how have how have they seemed to have reacted to their win at the weekend and also the Ireland performance?
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple of things there. In terms of their win, obviously they're delighted to do so, but again, their mindset is not, oh, we've 2 matches left. Maybe, we'll win one of those and we'll be grand. Ian Foster's attitude is there's 2 matches left, but we've got to win on Saturday. I mean, they're looking to close out this series on Saturday. So that tells you sort of a champion winning mindset from their point of view. He's quite complimentary, and indeed most New Zealand people that I've spoken to during the course of the week are very, very complimentary towards now what is a healthy rivalry between Ireland and New Zealand. Like, we're in a situation where I've been coming down here for years, and there was a stage many years ago where if we scored 1 try against the All Blacks, we were nearly going out celebrating. Last week we scored 3. We were held up over the line on probably another 3 or 4 different occasions. And we scored 3 last week, and we're grumpy with ourselves that we didn't execute or didn't score more. So they're the kind of standards that we're trying to judge ourselves against now, basically. But the All Blacks have huge respect for Ireland. There isn't a ticket to be had for any. Well, obviously, over the 3 tests, 114,500 tickets have been sold for the 3 games. You can't get them, even as the people that I travelled down with from Queenstown. We're getting phone calls from people back in Queenstown and mates of theirs wondering if they had any spare tickets for the game. And these are from non-Irish fans, basically. So it's the hottest ticket in town. I mean, the place out the way holds 28,500. It's full. I was talking to a shopkeeper a while ago, and he's going to the game. Dunedin is closing down, so everybody can go to the game. That's the excitement that it's brought, because we must remember, in terms of the COVID thing, we're obviously, 8 to 10 months ahead of them. But they're playing a match now in front of a full house for the first time in a hell of a long time. So, and that's the respect they have for Ireland. We were talking about last week, at the previous 5 games, I think we had 3 wins. It's now 3 out of 6. But can you imagine? Here we are, 3 wins out of the last 6 matches against New Zealand, and the place is a sellout. Wellington is awash with excitement next week from an Ireland point of view also, that Ireland are coming. But certainly New Zealand will try and close out the series this week. And Ireland honestly do feel that they have a chance of doing something this week to level the series up.
Yeah, and like the flip side, obviously, to that, Corky, of it is, there's been a bit of a cloud over I'd say the coverage that we've had on Ireland in the last 10 days or so off the back of the Maori game and then the first test, where we're talking about 2 defeats. Thankfully, in the last year or so, we've been a hell of a lot more used to winning than losing. So it's a little bit new territory for the recent Irish team. But the flip side to it is that if they can go and get a win in Dunedin this week, all of a sudden you're heading into the final week of a tour. It's 1 game level apiece. You've got a really, really exciting Maori game coming up on Tuesday. And the buzz is lifted back into this tour dramatically if they can go and get a victory.
Yeah, it's a pivotal game, really, isn't it? I mean, it's the 3rd match in a 5-game series. I mean, in previous trips that I've come down here, like for the British and Irish Lions tours, people will always say the Maori All Black game is like a 4th test. So Ireland would have played 5 tests in the space of 3 weeks. There'll be an awful lot of things that will be learned from that. But I mean, if they can cut down the error rate, I'm not saying, it's not as simple as saying chalk off the Seville Rees try or chalk off the RTÉ survey, bouncing ball try before halftime. That's 14 gone off the total. That's kind of too simplistic, to be perfectly fair about it, because I think New Zealand were certainly capable of going up another couple of notches. But Ireland are capable of scoring tries as well. And that's the frustrating thing about it. I'm still convinced, by the way, and I said this to one of the New Zealand backroom staff downstairs, we were talking about the chalked off tries. I'm still convinced that the Joey Carberry one was a try, but it wasn't given, and that's down to the officials. And obviously we have Jaco Piper in charge of the game this coming weekend, so it's going to be different. I mean, Ireland are going to have to be more composed in terms of a team, and I think they're going to have to be more composed in terms of dealing with a match referee as well, because it's a Southern Hemisphere referee, and regardless of whether we like it or otherwise, there are kind of nuances between the way the match is refereed in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, and the man in the middle this week is going to have a big say. But I think Ireland have a good chance, but they've got to cut out, the number of mistakes that they made last week in the opening game.
Yeah, and Birch, like the mistakes, I know it's a little bit, it feels a little bit silly sometimes to just talk about, oh, there were a lot of individual mistakes and, there were good things that the team did. But like, if you look at it, there were just pivotal, tiny little errors that were pounced on, like Severice's intercept try, the bounce of a ball just catches someone unawares. Now, I know it was a break right through the middle that Ireland let them have to begin with. But then you've got RD Savea's second try early in the second half, and that was Gary Ringrose, who I thought actually had an outstanding game up to that point, just slipped off a tackle that 99 times out of 100 or 999 times out of 1,000 you'd expect him to score. And then likewise, Ireland probably could and should have scored a handful of other tries, but just got held up the line. There were tiny little margins separating what was in the end a 23 points difference.
Yeah, there was. But I mean, when you look at us, like some of our players hadn't played for quite a while. Even our frontline players, our Leinster players, they were a week less in terms of game time. The Blues played the Crusaders in the Super Rugby final, the weekend of the URC final, I think. So maybe just looked a little bit off, half a meter off. I think that game will bring us on. That's the positive outlook on it. The other outlook is that, we're running on fumes and it's the end of a long season and we just the players need to get to a beach somewhere and build back up again, because it has been a long season. So that's I think we'll find out a lot more on Saturday. If we're a little bit off Saturday, it's probably more down to fatigue than the fact that it's been a little bit while since some of our players played, because I think that match last week will have got them back up to that level in terms of match fitness and match speed very quickly. I'd just be interested, Michael, there's a rumour around Dublin that Harry Byrne is coming home with a hamstring injury. What's the latest on injuries in the camp? Obviously, it's great to have Rob Herring back, but how do you think they're shaping up for next Tuesday with some of the knocks that are out there?
Yeah, that's one of the things. And I mean, you're also in a situation, say, for example, with Dave Heffernan, like concussions knocked him out also. That's the story there. I mean, I was at training in North Harbour Stadium earlier in the week. There's always people who, are carrying knocks and all of that type of thing. Now, Harry Byrne actually trained that day, but Keith Earls and James Lowe didn't. And I asked Mike Catt about it, and he said, like, Keith Earls at his age bracket, having played 80 minutes against the Maori and then 50 minutes against the All Blacks, like, it's just a matter of trying to look after the man's body, basically, to be fair. Rob Herring back, that's important in terms of this week. They obviously want to get a bit of mileage into the legs of Rob Herring and indeed Findlay Bealham. I think it's kind of not unfair, but I think Tom O'Toole is unlucky to lose out on that bench spot there, because I thought he did quite well. I'm a big fan of his. But they obviously want Findlay to get some mileage in his legs after the COVID thing, with a view maybe to the Maori All Black game, next Tuesday night, because that's a day less. Like the last time there was a Maori All Black game, it was Wednesday. So it's Tuesday this week, so it puts a bit of pressure in terms of the playing thing. But it's like, in terms of Harry Byrne, it's massively unfortunate from his point of view if his tour is finished, given the fact that they picked him in the first place to come out here. They obviously like him, would have wanted to see him in a competitive situation. They see him in training, yes, competitive match. That opportunity is missed out now, so that's unfortunate timing.
Yeah, it is. And like, for his entire, I suppose, last 18-24 months, it seems Bernard has been a bit unfortunate timing. Now, look, hopefully he's fit enough to play some part, but I would imagine he would have been hoping, he certainly would have been playing well long before a fourth tour match against the New Zealand Maori as well. Yeah, look, he's obviously a very talented player, and he's just struggled a little bit, and there's worries around his robustness. But that's, he's young. It'll come as he develops physically and he gets used to the stress that playing high level rugby, whether it's provincial rugby or international rugby, puts on your body. But I suppose from a development point of view from Ireland, in terms of finding out who is really number 3, behind Sexton, if he doesn't play in this tour, or he gets 20 minutes next week in the Maori game,
we're going to be none the wiser, really. That, and that's the unfortunate bit. But look, that's out of Farrell's hands. I think they made a big call to select him, and they obviously believe in him. But just unfortunately, he had that hamstring or groin issue, and it's delayed his ability to play. And hopefully he gets to play next week. But there's certainly a feeling that he might be on the way home.
Yeah, that'd be a real pity. Michael, speaking of obviously the other out half and captain Johnny Sexton, there was huge confusion earlier in the week as to what his situation was regarding was there concussion, was there not, and the head injury assessments he had. So we finally had it cleared up a couple of days ago that he was not concussed. The process is that, on the pitch or, down the tunnel when he was taken off, he goes through the first head injury assessment, and that indicates essentially whether he needs another one. If he fails it, it does not mean that he has concussion. That goes on to the HIA2, which he has a couple of hours later, and then ultimately there will be a third one a couple of days afterwards. It does seem like we can clear up for, the RFU have cleared up that he was not concussed. They were going through the steps as they normally would, but has the mixed messaging not really helped? Like it was pretty muddy waters up until probably Tuesday afternoon when we finally actually got the clarification as to what all those steps were.
Well, I mean, we now know what those steps are. That's the reality. And until he actually went through those steps, we couldn't comment on it with the correct hindsight and the correct information, basically. Now, I've come from the press conference where Andy Farrell was asked the question just about Johnny Sexton and how he was, and he said, first and foremost, the most important thing here is the health and welfare and well-being of Johnny Sexton. It's not, stick him in at any cost or take a risk or anything with him. So, people have opinions, people are entitled to opinions, but you've got to take on board the correct facts and have the correct information before you can make a correct call. Now, I know personally some of the people who were involved from a medical point of view with the Irish team, and they've been there for quite a long period of time, and I have the utmost regard for them. And I would say to you that they are not people who will be taking risks with the health or well-being of any player. It doesn't matter whether it's, Cian Healy to Harry Byrne to Peter O'Mahony to Johnny Sexton. They will put the health and well-being of any player above anything else. And they have followed the correct protocols as far as World Rugby has laid them down. And we find ourselves in a situation now. So we have a probably a greater understanding of everything, but when there's lack of information or lack of correct information, that leads to all sorts of theories knocking around the place, and how and comparisons between aren't one country great the way they do it and another country aren't, and maybe the RFU are disgrace and all of that type of stuff. But the people that I know who are involved with the RFU medically would never take a chance with the health and well-being of any player. And obviously it's Johnny Sexton in this situation. I just had a brief word with him. I mean, he came in to do some of the embargoed media in the room we were in, and I had a brief word with him as he was gone out, and I said, how are you feeling? And he said, I'm grand. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm absolutely grand. No problem. Trained away. And he said, we just need a good performance now. That's it.
And Birch, is it probably just the fact that this all happened within a few days of the Jeremy Loughman incident last week that probably has just added, been a little bit of fuel on the worries and frustration some people would have had around Sexton?
Yeah, and the Heffernan one as well. There's been 3 concussions. Sorry, there's been 2 concussions, and Johnny obviously failing HIA1, and then obviously people jump to conclusions that means he's concussed. But we now are very clear that the protocols mean that if he passes HIA2 and HIA3, it's not technically a concussion. So, look, I think there's so many moving parts to this. It's really the perfect storm for speculation and controversy and outrage. and then, and including that is the Tom Curry and Tom Francis incidents, which are completely separate in their own way. But as Michael said, everybody reads them sending them home, and they're like, why can't that happen to Johnny? But the reality is every individual deserves it to be totally unique to their situation and their medical record and their incident. I think the problem was a little bit as well, to add to that perfect storm was, it's only recently that we've all been hearing about the extended concussion protocols where you can't get back in 7 days. And, people, there was part of that press release which said, if a player has a history of concussion, well, then they can't get back in 7 days anyway, right? So, but the problem is Johnny technically isn't concussed because he only failed HIA1. So, it's just it's a lot of noise. I think, to be honest, I actually was on a broadcaster call on Monday or Tuesday with Rugby Players Ireland, Rugby Players Worldwide, and World Rugby, and Dr. Aina Falvey was on it, and they explained it brilliantly to us. You know what I mean? And I think that's the important thing now, is that it's very clear and transparent what actually is expected of players, what is expected of medics, and it takes away a lot of the distraction and noise. That's obviously, it's not fair on Johnny. It's and it's not fair on the Irish medical, as Michael said, team to be questioned by non-experts, people thousands of miles away. But that's what's happening in this case, and I suppose it's the nature of the growth of the game, and it's the nature of the love everyone has for Johnny Sexton as well. And but the reality is, we're a million miles away from it, and we have to trust the doctors and medical people, and as I said, as Michael said, and I know them as well. I would too. You know what I mean? But they're following their guidelines.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we finish up, guys, obviously New Zealand named their team. They just have the one change as well. Dalton Papali coming into the vacant spot left by Scott Barrett, who's gone into the second row, and Sam Whitelock, who's out of the game. Birch, Sam Whitelock is like, he's not a small loss. He's a line-out caller for New Zealand. He's one of the best second rows to have ever played the game. Is how big of an impact is that going to have?
I think he's a big loss. I think, to be honest, he had a very poor game in Dublin in November. He got rattled, and I thought he was outstanding last week. It was like, someone of his experience, there's certain games that they just know they want to nail, and he nailed that. Obviously, the fact that Scott Barrett has moved from 6 into second row takes away one of the defensive line options. So again, that should help us. Probably he's a bigger ball carrier, but he's less of a line-out option. And they brought Patrick Tupulipu onto the bench, who's a very powerful player, but has been away and playing his rugby in Japan. Will Jordan come back onto the bench is a boost for them, to be honest, because a lot of people think he would have started the first test only for COVID. I do think the Whitelock being out is a boost for Ireland, but it's certainly a very talented and exciting All Blacks 23. Not even with his omission. Yeah,
and finally then to you, Corky, like Birch mentioned Scott Barrett, and there's been a lot of people in Ireland would say that he shouldn't really be playing this weekend. What has the reaction been down in New Zealand to that incident between himself and Peter O'Mahony? Is there a sense in New Zealand as well he was quite lucky?
Yeah, a lot of people will say that, but it's kind of interesting, and that again goes into the interpretation of the way people look at things, which can cause a lot of frustration as well too. We feel from an Irish point of view, or Irish people will feel that maybe, that could have been a red card, but the deciding commissioner had a peek at it and decided that no action should be taken really. So, he gets ready to go again this week. Into the second row. I think the loss, as Bernard said, the loss of Sam Whitelock is immense. Not just his work around the lineup, but the fact that he carries the ball so often as well. Or like when I was doing the match on the radio last week, there's so much happening like in a game like that. And eventually, at one stage, I kind of, in the back of my head, I went Sam Whitelock, and I thought, God, you know, in my head, I went, gee, like whatever time it is in the game, he's actually still on. Like he's still causing damage. He's still carrying the ball quite a bit. Now, there was a big debate down here during the course of the week about Dalton Papali'i and whether he should be selected ahead of Sam Cane. Now, you know, I was on a radio thing there with Justin Marshall during the course of the week, and he was saying that Sam Cane is the captain. You know, he's not going to be dropped, but the people are quite excited about the fact that, you know, they've managed to squeeze Dalton Papali'i into the back row. So I think that'll be a bigger threat on a dry track. And again, as I said at the very, very outset, I think they're going to try and cause us difficulty by trying to play the game at tempo. So we've got to see how that's going to work. But could I just back to the concussion thing for a second? Mm-hmm. I'm in the city, Dunedin, which hosts the University of Otago, and I know I've been on calls with Éanna Falvey in the past, Dr. Éanna Falvey, former Ireland doctor, now with World Rugby, and it's right here in this city that a lot of the studies are being done into concussion, and that's why the World Rugby upgraded their protocols recently. So a lot of the background research and study and everything is actually being done right in the city where we are here. So I mean, we should acknowledge the fact that you know, World Rugby may not always have it perfect, but they've taken on board the latest statistical information, and this is an ongoing process, and will obviously be an ongoing process for a long period of time.
Yeah, it certainly will. But listen, lads, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Live commentary, Corky, 8:05 kickoff 2FM this weekend.
Yeah, 8:05. Be up early and be ready, as I said.
Good stuff. And Bert, enjoy the match as well. Thanks a million for joining us, fellas.
Good luck, everybody. Bye-bye.
See ya.
The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.